Howdy, I'm Karen from Round Table Yarns, and today I'm going to show you tips and tricks for how to get yarn that comes in this form into a cake so that you can actually knit or crochet from it. Although you can turn yarn into a ball or cake using your hands or the back of a chair, the easiest way to make a cake is to have two pieces of equipment: a ball winder, and this is a typical style ball winder, and a swift. The ball winder, there are lots of different types out there, but basically the idea is that it's going to have this guide right here for the yarn to go through, and the yarn is going to be winding itself around this cone where you've got this handle here that you turn, and the yarn will wind itself onto the yarn winder. As for the swift, most people have a swift that is an umbrella swift, and that is one that is tall and it basically folds in or folds out, and that is how you get to the circumference that you need for your yarn. I prefer this horizontal swift because I feel that you have better control of the yarn this way. I find the umbrella swift to be really awkward to try to get the yarn onto the swift, and so I prefer this kind. There are lots of different styles. This is a nice wooden one. There are some very economical wooden ones, and people I've seen make them even out of PVC pipe. So I recommend the horizontal swift if you don't already have one, but an umbrella swift is fine. I'm just going to show you on this. So the first thing that you need to do is put your yarn on the swift. So to do that, you need to open it up so that the yarn is in the loop. So the first thing you need to do is look at the ties. So this is one that's really easy to see right here, this choke tie. And you want to make sure that all the yarn is going in the right direction. You do not, let me show you, do it on purpose and show you. You do not want to have a strand of yarn like this, where if you look at the tie, that strand of yarn is coming down over the tie. You want the yarn to be going in the right direction. So pick a tie and check all of the yarn strands and make sure they're going in the right direction. And sometimes I check more than one tie just to be sure. Then take the yarn, put your hands inside the loop, and then just pull it out. Give it this little thwack. Move your hands around just a little bit to a different position and do this again. This is one of my really good tricks for preparing yarn to wind, because basically what this does is it evens out the strands a little bit, gets them settled back into the places that they should be. Like you can see there's this strand right here that looks like it's a little looser, and this just kind of helps to even things out a little bit. Once you've done that, keep your hand in the loops because you've already found where the yarn ties are telling you the yarn should go. So don't remove your hands, keep them in there, and put the yarn on the swift. So I have seen people who remove these ties before putting the yarn on the swift. Do not do that. Keep the ties on until you have it all adjusted on the swift. It will be so painful if something happens, especially with the umbrella swift, if your yarn falls and you no longer have those ties on there. You will end up with a tangled mess. So put your yarn on the swift. As you saw in this horizontal swift, I basically just kind of put the yarn around. I have pegs that move into different slots so I can adjust the size of the circumference. This one was a little loose, so I want to tighten it up just a bit. But I still have some good give with this yarn. I don't want it to be so tight that I'm stretching out the yarn. Like I can barely get this one in, but there I got it. Now there's a little give, but it really is very, very tight, and I do not want to have that. So I'm going to loosen it back up. See, now it's even hard to loosen here. Okay, I'm gonna loosen that one back up, and I think this one, it's still a little tight, so I'm gonna put it back this way. Okay, so now I have my yarn on the swift. It is tight, but not too tight. So a nice mid-range tightness there. Then it's time to cut the ties and get the yarn ready to start winding on the ball winder. So when you cut the ties, you want to be careful about a couple of things. First of all, it doesn't hurt to give just another check to make sure all the yarn is going in the correct direction according to the ties. There's no yarn that is overlapping. If it is, go ahead and fix it. Like again, let's pretend that this, we'll just do several strands of yarn, was coming over in this direction. I would notice, hey, that's not right according to this tie, and I would put it back over here. Honestly, when you end up with tangles, that's usually the reason, that you have not double checked and made sure that all the yarn is going in the right direction. So then you can cut your ties. Make sure you are only cutting your ties. Do not cut your yarn itself. And go around and cut all of the ties that are on the yarn. I'm actually going to come back to this one. So cut all of the ties, making sure you're only cutting the tie. I usually cut right at the knot, so that way I'm not cutting into the actual yarn. So sometimes I even cut off the knot and pull that off. At some point, you're going to find a tie, maybe it's one, maybe it's two, that has more than just the tie, that it also has the beginning and ending, or beginning or ending end of the yarn. So I always cut that off at the knot. And then this one does have a separate tie, so I pull that out, and I end up with one strand that is one end and one strand that is the other end. Move your cut ties aside so they don't accidentally get into the yarn. Also move your scissors aside. Here is a little trick. You want to make sure that you are finding the yarn that is coming from the outside of this hank. So if you notice, if I start with this yarn, it's come right here. I see, I don't know how well you can see it, but I see that it's on the inside of my loop of yarn. So I don't want to use this one. I'm going to actually put it back on the little wooden supports here, and I'm going to check the other end. So when I check this end, I see, oh yes, this one is coming from the outside. It's going inside a little bit, but here it comes back to the outside. So this appears to be the piece that is coming from the outside. It's so much easier to wind your yarn if you are using the outside strand. So your ball winder may be slightly different, so you'll want to check for that to see exactly how to set yours up if it does look a little bit different. But the basic idea will be that you probably have a guide, and so you put the yarn through that guide so it is flowing freely through there. And then there will probably be notches on the top, and you basically use those notches to hold the end of the yarn. And I kind of pull down on it so that way it's securely in those notches. Then I usually grasp very gently between my thumb and my forefinger the strand of yarn behind the guide. And then I start turning clockwise. And sometimes when I do that, if I'm too tight, I might pull this yarn that I've put here in these notches. It might come out. So I always watch for that, especially on my first few go rounds, to make sure that doesn't fall out, because I like to use a center pull ball, and so I need to make sure to keep track of that yarn. If you usually work from the outside of your yarn cake, then you might not worry so much about losing that. But if you want the inside, make sure you keep track of that. And then you just keep winding. So as you are winding, a couple of things to keep in mind. Your swift is going to be turning, so hopefully you can see the swift turning back there. And hopefully it will be a nice smooth turn if you've got your yarn set up so that it's coming from the outside, nothing is tangled, and it'll just come off the swift really easily. That is the point of the swift. Here, if you notice, I still have this yarn running through my hand over here. I'm just giving it very, very light tension. I am not grasping it really tightly. That would be bad because then I would put a lot of tension on the yarn. I'm just giving it basically a little bit of a guide. You can completely remove your hand and wind it like that. I just personally feel more secure if I just give it this little extra guidance. But you might want to check your yarn and your style and see how you feel. Notice that I am not winding super fast. I could probably go a little bit faster than I'm doing right now, but I do want to kind of keep the noise level down so you can still hear me. But I'm not winding super fast. If you wind really fast, you can increase the tension on this yarn coming from the Swift, and it's going to make a really tight yarn cake. And you do not want a tight yarn cake. That can stretch out your yarn, and that's not good for your yarn. You don't want it super loose either. So that's one reason why you do want to make sure there is some tension, just light tension on the yarn right here as it's winding into the ball, because if there's completely no tension at all, then it will be much too loose. So you want to have middle ground, not too tight, not too loose. And you just keep winding. And like I said, you can go a little bit faster. Usually I'm winding about this fast, but I try not to go any faster so that way I can make sure that that yarn cake is not too tight. So I'm not gonna sit here and have you watch me wind this yarn. I will come back to the video after I am close to the end. So I'm coming up to the end. I did want to show you a couple of other things. If you do need to stop in the middle of your winding, go ahead and try to stop your Swift as quickly as possible, because if you let your Swift continue spinning, then it's going to start wrapping the yarn around the other direction. So try to kind of have your hand so that way you can grab onto the Swift and stop it from moving. And then when you're ready to start up again, kind of start up slowly, make sure everything is still going well, and then keep going. So as you get to the end, you might want to wind faster because you're so excited about ending, but just kind of keep it the speed that you've been doing for the entire ball. Make sure at the end, if you have not been holding on to the yarn, go ahead and start holding on to it. Again, no tension, you don't want to tug, you're just very lightly holding on to it, so it's just basically running through your fingers. That way, when the end comes, you can kind of have some control over how that gets added to the cake. I like to really pull my my yarn in slowly, so that way it's not just kind of ended up very loose there. And then, let's see if I can get a good angle to show you this. You want to take that end and tuck it into the cake. So I usually just grab a couple of strands here, there we go, and I take that end and I just give it a nice little tuck. And again, you don't want things to be too tight, so although I do give it a little tug, you don't want to pull it so tight that you're strangling the yarn. That would not be a great idea. So that end is now nice and secure. Don't forget, we've got this end from the center. If you want to keep track of that, because you want a center pull ball, make sure that you pull that out so that you can see that end and hold on to it while you are lifting the yarn cake off of the yarn winder. So to lift it off, put your fingers, and I put both hands, all fingers except for the thumb and index finger right here, pinching this yarn under the yarn cake to really fully support it. Don't just grab the yarn like this and pull it off. That might lead to yarn kind of coming loose, and so the best way to do is to take it from the bottom, support it. So put your fingers underneath the yarn cake and slowly lift up, and as you're doing it, you'll notice that the center closes up and you still have your center strand, so you can use your center pull ball. Or if you prefer to use the end from the outside, there it is, and you can just grab that when you're ready to knit or crochet. So that is how you create this nice cake of yarn, so that way you can put it in your project bag and start your project. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I am Karen Dawn on Ravelry and Karen Dawn Knits on Instagram. Thanks, and happy knitting.